Close your eyes. Think deeply about a single idea that doesn't exist today, but if it did, would radically transform the world. This idea can be a technology or a business. It can be a change to the system or a new way of thinking. It can be a world treaty or a community initiative. Keeping your eyes closed, envision what the world looks like with your idea in it. How do people connect with one another? How do they move from place to place? How do they solve problems? And most importantly, how do you feel in this world? Is it a world that you're driven to create? Now, what if I told you that your idea will never work? You can open your eyes. And I promise you that every pioneering idea faces this statement. But why? Sometimes an idea might seem so far-fetched, it's all but impossible. No one's ever done it before. Why should we believe it can be done now? Or maybe the idea has been tried, even many times, and failed. What makes this time different? In my career as a physicist and communicator, I've been fortunate enough to sit on the front lines of some world-changing ideas, from discovering the Higgs boson to building flying boats. And let me tell you, whenever someone says that will never work, they are haters. Because we all know that things that exist today seemed impossible a generation ago. And the things that seem impossible now are just over the horizon. And in my experience, when people say it will never work, it's because they fail to recognize three key factors. And whether your idea is entrepreneurial or philanthropic or personal, I'll help you translate those factors into guiding principles that will help you overcome your haters and succeed anyway. Let's start with a story about quantum computing. For those of you who are unfamiliar, quantum computers are an emerging technology that harness the power of quantum physics to solve extremely complex problems that even today's most powerful supercomputers can't solve. The building block of a quantum computer is called a qubit. And for quantum computers to realize their full potential, they need to have a very large number of qubits, and those qubits need to behave perfectly. And it's very difficult to do both of these things at the same time. To help you understand why this is so hard, I want you to think of qubits like toddlers. Tiny packets of energy that are very difficult to control. And when you put a lot of them in a small space, it gets very noisy. Now, in the early days of the quantum industry, a common approach to solving this challenge was to put even more qubits on the chip, whose sole job it was to quiet down the noisy ones. But one company had a different idea. A startup called Rugani Computing said, instead of putting more and more qubits on bigger and bigger chips, what if we put fewer qubits on smaller chips where they're less likely to be distracted, and then string those chips together? And I distinctly remember talking to a journalist in 2021 when Rugani made this breakthrough. And she said, I just don't get it. If this really is the best solution, how come no one else is doing it? Well, in tech, if your innovation isn't solving a core problem, this skepticism might be warranted. But if you are tackling the hardest things head on and coming up with real solutions, that skepticism turns out to be short-sighted. In fact, a few years after Rugani made this announcement, other, more well-known companies started doing it too. So think back to your idea. What is the hardest problem that hasn't been solved yet? And what are you going to do about it? Let's switch gears now and talk about wigs, not the hairpiece. WIG stands for Wing in Ground Effect. And a wig is a type of vehicle that flies very low over the surface of the water on a cushion of air, like a pelican. In theory, this is much more efficient than climbing to high altitudes and flying through the sky. But in practice, it's very difficult. Humans have been attempting to harness wig technology for nearly 100 years, and they have continuously failed. Perhaps no example is more infamous than the Caspian sea monster. Developed in Russia in the 1960s, it was, at the time, the largest flying machine to ever have been built. And this came with a lot of challenges. It's massive. It had to gain a lot of speed in order to take off from the water to the air. But that wasn't always possible in choppy seas. And once airborne, the pilot had to manually control a number of complex maneuvers just a few meters above the surface, where any wrong move could spell disaster. Tragically, that's what happened. The Caspian sea monster crashed into the sea in 1980, and the WIG program vanished along with it. But then something interesting happened. In 2020, two MIT-trained aerospace engineers named Billy and Mike were working on concepts for electric aviation. And they themselves became skeptical about how this technology would work in the real world. They wanted to find a way to make battery-powered flight more efficient. They did some research, and they came across the concept of a wig. Billy and Mike quit their jobs on Friday the 13th in the year 2020, and they started a company to build all-electric wing and ground craft. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. News articles, meetings with investors, internet comments, if we want to talk about haters. They couldn't tell their story without being reminded of the colossal failure that was the Caspian sea monster. They knew that if they were going to be successful, they had to solve those core challenges. Fortunately for Billy and Mike, in the 40 years that had passed since the Caspian sea monster met its fate, a lot had transpired. Hydrofoils had been perfected in America's Cup yacht racing to help lift the boat out of the water and glide effortlessly through the waves. In automotive, high-energy batteries meant that wigs could travel up to 180 miles on a single charge, the perfect sweet spot between ferries and airplanes. And digital flight computers, adopted in commercial aviation, enabled the automation of very complex controls, making it easier and safer to take the helm. Billy and Mike were not the first to use any of these technologies, but they were the first to bring them all together for the first time in a brand new way. And in 2022, they successfully demonstrated the first battery-powered hydrofoil takeoff wing and ground effect flight. And they called their wig the Sea Glider. That company is called Regent Craft, and those Sea Gliders are being built right here in Rhode Island. So consider ideas that are compared to previous attempts or past failures. And consider this next key factor, the missing pieces. If an idea relies on components or systems that haven't been invented yet or simply aren't available, skepticism might be fair. But if you have the right pieces in the right places, it just might be the right time. So think back to your idea. What missing pieces are you waiting for? The last story I want to talk to you about today is about internet drones. 10 years ago, more than 60% of the world was still unconnected to the internet. And one tech company by the name of Facebook, maybe you've heard of it, was on a mission to connect the world. And one idea they had was to beam internet from drones down to the ground. But not just any drone. Giant solar-powered drones with the wingspan of a 737 that weighed only as much as a motorcycle and operated on the power of a hairdryer. And these drones were designed to stay in the sky for 90 days at a time. Now, Facebook did everything right. They tackled the hardest problem first. They designed and built the aircraft from scratch. They also leveraged enabling technologies, solar power, batteries, communications payloads. But just a few years after the project took off, Facebook abandoned it. What happened? To understand what happened, let's revisit our first two examples. In the case of Rugani Computing, they were a venture-backed startup, which meant they had limited capital and limited time. They committed to an idea that they believed in, even when the rest of the industry was marching in the opposite direction. And they stayed steadfast in the face of skepticism. Or what about Billy and Mike? When they quit their jobs, their significant others said, "You have 6 months to figure out how to make money, or you're going back to corporate." I work with Billy and Mike every day, and I can tell you these guys have real skin in the game. Let's go back to Facebook. Giant drones were a nice to have, but at the end of the day, the success of their business did not depend on it. And that brings us to our final and perhaps most important lesson. And that one is about survival. Powerful ideas to succeed, we must commit to them as though our lives and livelihoods depend on it. So recall your idea once more. And remember how it felt when I told you it would never work. What did that do? Did it make you want to give up? Or did it make you even more determined to succeed? I hope that I'm your only hater, but we all know that's not how the world works. So the next time a hater tells you that your idea will never work, I want you to remember these 3 guiding principles. Tackle the hardest problems. These are your gateway to success and where real progress is made. Find your missing pieces, bring them all together, and then take the leap. And finally, commit existentially. Don't treat your idea as an experiment or a nice to have. Embrace it with the energy of something that you and the world can't live without. Thank you.